Right, good morning, everyone. I want to thank you guys for joining today's session, SUSE Manager 3 in the cloud. My name's David Roach. I'm a cloud sales engineer with SUSE. I'm one of your presenters. Joining me as a presenter is Don Vosberg, who is a technology specialist.
Well, I'm just a SE.
So,
But I'm also on the SUSE Manager core team, so.
And what does that mean?
Well, we have an augmented team for the product that includes a combination of SEs and consultants and support people from around the globe that meet twice a year to help align the roadmap and adjust with current versions so that everybody's on the same page of where things are going. So I get to fly to Nuremberg a couple times.
All right. And today we're going to start off by providing you a quick background on SUSE Cloud and its partnerships with AWS and Azure. Some of the images or products that we make available on those platforms. We will then describe how we connected the AWS platform to Azure so that we can use SUSE Manager to manage both platforms. Don will take over and describe SUSE Manager and then perform the demonstration showing instances both deployed on Azure and AWS. So quickly, since 1992, SUSE has been providing these quality products to our partners and our customers. And we currently have over 7,000 certified applications, as well as 20,000 certified systems. And really this combination of the applications and the systems has resulted in 2/3 of the Fortune Global 100 companies using SUSE Linux Enterprise Server.
And the other third, they're on our target customer list, so hopefully it'll happen.
So we really understand the impact that Azure and AWS are having really for IT organizations of all sizes. And we have great relationships with both AWS and Azure. And in fact, we have an Azure representative here, David Duncan, who supports SUSE on AWS. Yep. And currently, our first deployment of our SLES image. What did I say?
You mixed up your clouds.
Oh, did I? Did I say Azure?
Yes, you did.
I did say Azure. David Duncan is with AWS.
They both start with A, and it's early in the morning. Give them a break.
I looked at Microsoft.
Come on,
My fault. Yeah, I'm hydrating. Sorry. In 2010, we actually released our first image of SUSE Linux Enterprise Server on AWS. And in 2012, we released our first image on Microsoft Azure. So we have over 6 years of experience providing our images on these public cloud platforms. And AWS was first. Sorry, David. With this experience, we're able to offer you optimized images for your cloud or for the cloud environment. Currently, we have SUSE Linux Enterprise Server and SUSE Linux Enterprise Server for SAP applications on both platforms, Microsoft Azure and AWS. There is a third image available on Azure. That's SUSE Linux Enterprise Server for HPC. It's a purposely built image that takes advantage of the Azure HPC infrastructure, which leverages InfiniBand, GPUs, or RDMA connectivity, and SUSE does have that capability. Whenever we're talking about public cloud, there's a common question that comes up. Customers often ask, how do subscriptions work in a public cloud? We provide you two options at SUSE. The first is an on-demand option. And the way to think about it, it's really a utility cost. So if I spin up a server for 5 days, 14 hours, I'm only paying the cost for that subscription for 5 days, 14 hours. I'm not signing a long-term agreement. There's no minimum fee that we charge you. So if I spin it up for 2 hours, I spin it up for 2 hours. And the cost based for that subscription is really based on the size of the virtual machine. The virtual machine, if I spin up a 4 vCPU, 30 gig server, as opposed to an 8 vCPU, 128 gig server, there is going to be a price difference. Yes, David.
So there's not a tremendous variation in the cost of SUSE on that platform, right? It just changes the cost of the instance.
It just changes the cost of the instance.
So you're really very
Well, and the subscription cost. So the subscription cost does vary with the size. And the reason why, and it'll come clear, with bring your own subscription, we allow customers to bring their current subscriptions or entitlements to the cloud. And you can spin up to 2 images or virtual machines, instances or virtual machines on the cloud with that physical subscription. And so to answer your question, David, if I spin up 5 smaller instances, but it doesn't equate to what would be considered a 2-proc instance, the cost does show. You can also use your existing support agreements in the cloud. So if you have priority support, that priority support follows through to the cloud, and you can contact SUSE based off of that agreement. So before I go into describing how we configured AWS, I do want to touch on 2 cloud market trends that I think underscores the importance of SUSE Manager. So in 2016, RightScale performed its annual survey of asking customers a lot of questions. One of the questions that was asked was, what is your cloud strategy? And the cloud strategy in this survey resulted was enterprise cloud strategy. They categorized enterprise as over 1,000 employees, so if you want to debate that, that's fine. But for companies over 1,000 employees, 82% of those companies are looking at multi-cloud strategies. And broken down even further, 11% are looking at multiple private clouds, whether that's OpenStack, VMware, Hyper-V, whatever the case is. 16% are looking at multiple public cloud environments. So that's very similar to our demonstration. AWS, Azure, Google is another example that you'll see. And 55% are looking at a hybrid. And really the importance of this, and why I think this is a good trend, is customers now have choice. You don't have to choose one vendor. If your workload is best suited to run internally, great. If you need to run within an application some workloads on a public cloud infrastructure, fine. That's great. But you need something to manage that, and that's really where SUSE Manager comes in. Yes.
Yeah, the government side of vendors in the government side, that would be nice.
If what?
He wants to know. Yeah.
Oh. No, oh, okay. They didn't break it down for the government. I mean, we can look into that. I know we're going to have a follow-up discussion, and I can look at that for you. Good question. So the second trend, and I didn't want to put, it's something to consider, right? And this is early in the morning. So Forrester's Global Business Technographics Infrastructure Survey, great name. A marketing person really did well creating that survey name. Asked the question, what are your firm's concerns, if any, with public cloud? Looking at the top 4 concerns, the first is security concerns regarding application data protection, privacy concerns regarding data breaches or theft, software licensing, and to round it out, meeting specific compliance requirements. Those top 4 concerns really involve tool set. How are you managing your cloud? These are all concerns. What am I doing when I deploy to the cloud to understand what's being deployed and how to manage those deployments? And really, SUSE Manager can help you meet that challenge by providing you insight to the complexity of your deployment, the compliance requirements, and oftentimes people talk about having standards for those systems they deploy, and SUSE Manager can check to validate not only an internal compliance, but if there's any external requirements, you can follow up on that. Now, to help demonstrate SUSE Manager managing multiple platforms, we did stand up, Don and I did stand up an AWS environment. We already had SUSE Manager deployed on Azure, so it's not because SUSE Manager can't run on that platform. Really, SUSE Manager, it's an application that runs on SLES, or SUSE Linux Enterprise Server, and it can run on any platform. It was just based off of convenience. We didn't want to set it up on AWS. So we stood up the AWS environment, and before I describe it, before we do the demonstration, I do want to touch on some of the names that AWS uses on creating this environment and how we set it up. So virtual private cloud, or a VPC, that's really the software-defined network that you create on the AWS control panel. And what we had to consider when connecting to Azure are really the IP address schemes, right? We couldn't have a conflict on subnetting or subnets, otherwise the routing wouldn't work, and SUSE Manager couldn't manage those virtual machines. So we picked a CIDR block. Whenever you create a virtual private cloud, there's one created by default. But whenever you create one in Amazon or on AWS, you assign a CIDR block address. And we chose 172.21/16. Right? And based off of that, we created two subnets because we weren't sure how this was going to work. So we created a public subnet, a DMZ, and a private that has no native connectivity to the internet. And we created a /24 for each of those subnets. And you have you have the ability to control whatever you wanted to subnet within AWS. And in order to give, whenever you create that VPC, in order to give it connectivity to an outside or to the internet outside of that VPC, you have to associate a network endpoint. And Amazon calls that an Amazon Internet Gateway. And all it is a network endpoint that you associate to that subnet that you want to allow to communicate externally. And we did that. We created the Amazon Internet Gateway, associated it to the DMZ, and you could go out to the internet, communicate with SUSE Manager on that private network or on the DMZ network. So we tested out, we deployed a system, validated that worked, and said, okay, now let's look at the private network. How are we going to manage these virtual machines on the private network? Now, I did add VPC router. And I wanted to touch on that because if you're looking at deploying, an environment in multiple regions, and it's common, we see this a lot. Customers will have a production VPC and a test or dev VPC because they don't want those two environments intermingling. And you can create a VPC router that enables communication between those, very much like you can create a DMZ and be specific, DMZ for those. You can be specific on what subnets you allow to communicate between a production environment and a test environment with that VPC router. Yeah. So what we did to communicate to allow that private network to communicate with the Azure virtual network was create a NAT gateway. It's an appliance that you can deploy out on the DMZ, and we created a route to saying anytime you're leaving this subnet, go out to that NAT gateway. All right.
So that was specified in the route table?
Correct. Yeah. And if you have any questions, I'll be around. I can show you what I did. And for those of you who listen later, I am sorry. I will not be around. Azure Virtual Network.
Your email address is in the presentation.
Oh, is it? Oh, okay.
I believe so, yeah.
So the Azure Virtual Network, shortened for VNet, It's very similar to, excuse me. It's very similar to the AWS in VPC in that it's a software-defined network. You can control the CIDR block associated to that VNet like you can on AWS. You can manage what ports you want available through security groups. In Amazon, it's very similar. In Azure, it's network security groups. It allows you to group these, either associate a server or a group of servers, and be specific on what port access you want to allow. And the reason I point that out is on the Azure environment, we have SUSE Manager deployed on the DMZ server, or DMZ network. And we have port 443 open to that, and we're using network security groups to secure that. And we're using port 80 for the web interface. There's also salt Minion traffic that we have to manage, and it's 4505 and 4506 that we have. So we're using network security groups. If you're using Azure Classic, I don't know if it's still available, but it was managed through endpoints, and it was specific to servers. It didn't group. That feature came later. So with that being said,
You're going to turn it over to me.
I'm turning it over to Don.
Okay. So I'm going to talk just a little bit on the slides, and then afterward, I'm going to go to demo pretty quick.
Hold up.
I'm good. Hi. So SUSE Manager has been a product for SUSE since 2011. And we started putting it into the public cloud in 2014. So I was actually part of the team that was charged with testing SUSE Manager alongside of the Microsoft System Center Operations Manager, Ops Manager. And as a part of that, Microsoft said they would set up the Ops Manager piece in their cloud. And then I was supposed to come in and set up the SUSE Manager side. At that time, as far as I know, nobody in the world had ever set up SUSE Manager in a public cloud. So if you've done it before 2014, raise your hand. Yeah, okay, great, there we go. So, but just the same way, go ahead and click the next one here. So just the same way, you have to manage your on-prem servers. If you own them and you have security vulnerabilities and patching responsibilities, those carry forward into the cloud side as well. So what we've tried to do is make it so that cloud-based SUSE Manager can be functional regardless of where your client hosts reside. So obviously, actually one of the things that's the biggest boost for us to have SUSE Manager in a public cloud is for people who don't even have x86 systems. So like System Z customers, we have System Z customers and Power customers that don't usually have access to x86 systems. So we can actually manage on-prem computers from the cloud, or we can manage things in Azure. So the original intent was to manage Azure VMs, which I will show you some of that. And then I have a virtual machine on my laptop in a NATed network that's being managed by the host in Azure. And then we have 2 machines that are out in the Amazon cloud that are being managed through the Azure SUSE Manager. So what we would recommend if you're doing a high volume environment is to place a SUSE Manager proxy server. Part of the reason why I can't demonstrate that today is because we just enabled the Salt proxy portion of SUSE Manager October the 24th. So it's pretty new, and there's almost no documentation right now. So getting it set up, yeah, getting it set up. You might want to wait until after I put something up in a SUSE Manager wiki. But we have a public-facing SUSE Manager wiki. That includes a cloud section. So I don't know if that's on the links or not. But we're trying to make SUSE Manager available in all the different platforms that we serve. And obviously doing a SALT integration is part of that. So the connections today are to the Amazon peoples are on SALT. So yeah, we learned a few lessons in this process. Obviously, if you're going to take an image in the cloud, just remember that on SLE 12 especially, there are some cloning things that potentially could cause you issue. So one of those is the systemd machine ID. So in Etsy, there's an Etsy machine ID file. If that is identical on your client, every client will replace the previous one you registered with SUSE Manager, because it thinks, oh, here you are again. You came back to see me. So I'm going to put you back right over the other one. And then it looks really frustrating. So the way you fix that is you just remove that file and you can run the systemd machine ID setup. It's a single run app. There's no options and it just gens a new one. Before registration, please do this before you're trying to register with SUSE Manager. Otherwise it will obliterate the other one.
And I do want to touch that on the startup, as you're creating an instance, you can define this command in the user, like on AWS, the advanced user startup, so that it executes that and
yeah,
it'll
so you
fix it
don't
ahead
end
of
up
time.
trying to deploy a SALT minion and then all of a sudden now you realize this hit you and you want to know in advance. The second thing that we had a problem with is the funky host name problem. So as you probably know, cloud instances have these like really long string that includes dashes inside the IP address and a bunch of obscured things that may not be what you want to know when you're trying to manage that box in SUSE Manager. So with SALT, you actually have the option of being able to create a Minion ID. And that can be placed in a number of places. You can put it in the actual Etsy SALT Minion file. You can actually create a separate Minion ID file under Etsy SALT Minion.d. But either way, then that becomes the label by which SUSE Manager communicates with that box. So, and you'll see in the demo what it looks like. So are we going to the demo yet? Whoa, okay. This is the fun part. All right. So apologize to the Amazon dude here. I have to show you my Azure portal. Are you? Thank you. Okay. Love you too, man. Okay, so this is my SUSE Manager server in the Azure portal, and I'll try to make this a little bigger here. Let's hit F11 and do that. So this guy I have right now with 8 cores and 14 gig. I've sized it up and down a couple of times. It was getting a little bogged down with only the 7 gig of RAM. But one of the things that I did with this was make sure that my swap file was on disk that was going to be fast, so that if I had to dig into swap, it wasn't going to be waiting on, you know, the other end of the universe to come back and see me. So this one's been up since early this year, like March of this year. And you see that the host name, notice at the top, the host name is Suma3 Rev4, because that's how many tries it took me to get a usable one. So I had to build it 4 times. But, you know, honestly, it's not because I'm stupid, and it's not because the product is that hard. It's just because nobody had tried it with SUSE Manager 3 before. Yes, so I just kept iterating and deleting, iterating, deleting until I got to this one, and it's been sitting there since March. So I think we figured it out now. So this server, I'm going to actually show you, hopefully. Hit F11 again here. So here's my server. So in this box, I have a SUSE Manager, as you know, can manage multiple different distributions. So this is a CentOS box that's running on Azure. This is a /12 SP1 box that's running as a virtual machine under VMware on my laptop. These two are /12 SP1 hosts that are in Amazon Web Services. So I've got a variety of things here. Obviously, I still have some /11 SP4, and again, these are running in the cloud on the Azure side. They're part of a different demo, so we're not going to mess with those today. One of the most powerful things with SUSE Manager that we almost always try to demonstrate for customers is the audit capability. So you may be familiar. How many of you are familiar with the dirty cow vulnerability? Okay, so dirty cow was a kernel vulnerability. It was pretty recent, October, and it allowed for escalated privileges that weren't supposed to be there. Yeah, it was not a pretty thing. So the CVE that's associated with that is 5195. So we're going to look for the common vulnerability and exposure number associated with dirty cow and try to see across this varied portfolio of systems which ones are affected, which ones are not, if there's a patch available. Oh, looks like we got some that aren't patched yet. Okay, so one of those is our AWS host, internal host 2. So we're going to go ahead and patch this guy. So and I'm going to patch a couple of them. So and this, if I just look for kernel, and in this interface for patches, if you notice, I can actually search for important, recommended, moderate. The severity type is part of the synopsis. So here is my patch from SUSE related to this one. So it tells me, it fixes this escalated privilege problem that we had with dirty cow. So I can look at the CVE, and there's my CVE number that we were looking at before. And I can see the details on that, and I opened it in a new tab so we can see what that is. And it actually lets you go from here to the National Vulnerability Database and see the severity levels, and it will tell you, how bad this dude is. And if he's really bad, then you probably want to fix it. And anything that's a kernel vulnerability, I'm going to want to fix. So you can approach it from SUSE Manager in a number of different ways. You can come at it from the audit of the CVE itself. You can look at it from the systems portfolio, if you wish, or you can look at the patch. So this is actually the view from the particular patch that SUSE provided. So, and it will show me what affected systems I have, and there's my AWS host. So I can apply the patch, and like anything with SUSE Manager, I can schedule it to be happening in the future. I cannot schedule it to happen in the past. That would be time travel, and it's not allowed. So I'm not that fancy. So I'm going to go ahead and confirm this action chain. So the other thing that you can do, another thing that you can do with systems that have SALT connected to them is make them part of a SALT state. So we've already applied this web state to our host in the Amazon cloud. So this does a number of things, allows me to do Apache installation, and then make sure that the service is running and enabled so it persists across a boot. And then my firewall service I'm turning off. That might be a little harsh, but I I just want to make sure I wasn't caught shooting myself in the foot by turning on the web service and not allowing the port through. I probably could be a little bit less brutal by mapping port 80, but I chose not to. Right, exactly. You don't want 3 firewall layers. It starts to get super confusing. So I turn it off there. And this last piece is actually a managed file. So I can point the index.html file on this server to a file that's managed on the SUSE Manager box. And then every time the state is applied, that gets enforced. So you can schedule state application if you wish. You can manually apply them. But all of these persist. And notice that it says package.installed. That means that it just verifies for it. So if it's already there, then it's all happy and says, oh, good. I'm not going to fail an install at that point, right? So let's go back to our scheduler. I'm going to have to make this smaller. There we go. Okay. And we're praying that this gets picked up, dude. Can you restart your Salt Minion just to make sure? One of the things that I will show you on the Salt side, I have this is my local client here, and if you want to see what Salt is doing in the foreground, you can. So I'm going to schedule a package update for this guy. And I have this is that server in VMware here. I know VMware is not officially a cloud.
Is it the private or the public? Was it the DMZ or the private? Which one are you doing?
Internal host 2. So you can run Salt Minion in the foreground. So Salt Minion is the client package. So Salt actually uses 0MQ, and that's why the 4505 and the 4506 are the ports that are open to this guy. So any questions that you guys have on the process or connecting or running SUSE Manager? Now this is actually bringing my subscription to SUSE Manager to the cloud. Correct?
For SUSE Manager.
Yes.
But yeah.
So SUSE Manager is not available as on-demand.
Correct.
If you run SUSE Manager in the public cloud, you always need to bring your subscription.
Correct. Thank you. I was making sure I clarified that properly. And there you have it.
So, but I can still manage on demand.
Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely. So the Salt Minion packages are available in a Bootstrap repository that resides on the SUSE Manager server, or now with SLES 12, you can get them in the Advanced Management module. So, for example, though, if you're managing CentOS or Red Hat images, obviously they don't have access to those repositories. So we supply a Bootstrap repository that has validated Salt Minion packages, so you can manage systems other than SLE 12 through those repositories. And then they get mapped to the client before he registers with SUSE Manager. It's exposed to the place where they have a consumable repository prior to registration. And then once they do, they get the assigned channels that you create inside of SUSE Manager to keep your images consistent. So a lot of times customers will create a clone set of patches that are through a certain date, so that I standardize on this is how it's supposed to look. All of them look like this. If I don't do that and I just update all the current, this week's deployment might look different than last week's deployment. So very few people use the direct to the upstream patching in enterprise. And you can carry that same discipline forward with you to the public cloud.
So, so I'm refreshing my channels. Am I doing that from the top or is it you're reaching out to the customers?
Yeah, at that point, the SUSE Manager is not talking to the SMT that's in the regional cloud. And part of the reason for that is that there's entitlement repositories that we don't wish to expose in those regional SMT servers. That SUSE Manager reads when you look at SUSE Manager and how it's set up, it uses your organization credentials to determine what subscriptions you have rights to. So it will then be able to populate channels based on those subscription rights.
And when you're using an on-demand image, if it's SUSE Linux Enterprise Server, there's no other extensions or products available for that.
Cool? Yes? No? Good? I'm done, man.
All right.
Yeah?
So now, customizing
Oh, it finished. Look.
my salt configuration. What kind of extensions do we have for the cloud? Like 6.
So I know
I don't think that's integrated.
it's
is
not
it?
integrated into SUSE Manager, but but there is, yeah.
You don't want me to do that?
So there is an
Yeah,
AWS module.
Yeah, this is not a cloud orchestration piece, right? This is really more of a compliance. Yeah, it's SUSE Manager, right? It manages the SUSE part of it, not the AWS part of it or the Azure part.
Though is that with that platform, with the SALT platform, you can actually add additional modules on that platform and use that Minion to manage other things outside of that would be related to your environment, but outside of SUSE Manager. SUSE Manager is not going to reflect those changes, but it will allow you to manage based off of what's been deployed out there, manage your security, and now possibly manage that platform. So that's a good point. Yeah.
Oh, I was going to show you this screen and highlight just a couple of things. Notice here that the host name is that cloud-friendly host name, but how SUSE Manager addresses it is with the Minion ID. So we've given it a Minion ID that means something to me, but I still retain the host name structure. And obviously, I know the IP address. It gives me some information about the box that it's para-virtualized. I can actually get, if I look at, let's see, does it have, yeah, here's hardware information on this guy. It will tell me how many CPUs it sees and are allocated and how much memory it has. So, you know, I get this kind of information on the box. Yeah, this is how it reports back through AWS in terms of what its hardware is. So SUSE Manager can give you an inventory list too. So you have a configured report that can give you that information. So you can have it push out, you know, all of what you're. Obviously, I don't see any type of public network mapping, but I see how it's mapped to the Ethernet addresses on the box. Is that cool? Yeah. Yeah, look at this. The BIOS, it has Amazon in it. Isn't that cool? Over here under System, this one. It thinks it's XEN. Is that right? Okay. Cool. Well, thank you very much for your time. Do you have any reference slides or anything?